By now you probably know that the House has passed Trump's big, beautiful bill.
It's very big. It's the big, beautiful bill. But the beautiful is because of all of the things we have.
By now you probably know that the House has passed Trump's big, beautiful bill. But not without some drama. It only passed with one vote. The bill is now in the Senate, where more fighting begins.
They're enough to slow this process down until the president, our leadership, gets serious about returning to a pre-pandemic level. There's no amount of pressure that President Trump can apply to me that exceeds the pressure I feel, the promises I made to stop mortgaging our kids' future.
So let's go over some key provisions of the bill.
So tax changes. The Trump-era tax cuts are extended beyond 2025. There is a provision for no tax on tips or overtime pay. The child tax credit has increased, and the SALT deduction has been capped at $40,000. Medicaid and SNAP adjustments. Work requirements for Medicaid start in December of 2026. SNAP and food stamp work requirements are expanded to include recipients ages 55 to 64. $698 billion cuts from Medicaid over the next 10 years, affecting 7.6 million Americans. And for defense and energy spending, $12 billion allocated to reimburse states for border security costs. Tax credits for wind and solar energy end by 2028, but nuclear energy incentives remain. AI regulations paused for 10 years, preventing states from enforcing new AI laws. Now I want to go over the Medicaid provisions in more detail. So the first section, work requirement. Adults aged 19 to 55 without dependents must complete 80 hours per month of work, job training, or volunteering to keep Medicaid. There are exemptions. Pregnant women, people with disabilities, and caregivers are not required to meet these rules. Start date, originally set for 2029, now moved up to December 2026. Eligibility and enrollment rules. States must verify addresses every 6 months to prevent duplicate enrollments. Medicaid redeterminations, checking if people still qualify, will happen twice a year instead of annually. Federal funding cuts for states that don't enforce stricter eligibility checks. Funding cuts and cost sharing. $625 billion in Medicaid spending reductions over 10 years. 7.6 million Americans expected to lose coverage due to stricter eligibility rules. Medicaid expansion enrollees with income above the poverty line must pay up to $35 per medical visit, so a copay. Restrictions on providers and services. Planned Parenthood and clinics that perform abortions lose Medicaid funding, and states are discouraged from using Medicaid funds for undocumented children. Wow, that doesn't seem right. I haven't read this, but we can definitely go over this together and see what's in this no tax on tips provision that's in the big, beautiful bill. All right, eligibility criteria. This applies to employees in occupations that customarily receive tips, such as servers, bartenders, and delivery drivers. Workers must earn less than $160,000 annually, and tips must be reported to the employer and included on the employee's W-2 form. Only cash tips are eligible. Non-cash tips, e.g. tickets or passes, remain taxable. Food and wine, etc. Okay, tax deductions. Let's talk about those. That's the next section. It allows a deduction of up to $25,000 in tip income from federal taxable income. That doesn't seem like a lot. Some people earn the majority of their income from tips. The deduction is available for years 2025 through 2028 under the current House bill. Okay, let's talk about reporting requirements. Both the employee and their spouse, if filing jointly, must have valid Social Security numbers. Okay. The Treasury Department is tasked with publishing a list of qualifying occupations within 90 days of the bill's passage. So we don't know 100% for sure what is going to be a qualifying occupation. Let's talk about the next section, which is limitations. The provision does not exempt tax income from payroll taxes. Social Security and Medicare taxes still apply. Approximately 40% of tip workers earn too little to owe federal income taxes, so they may not benefit from this deduction at all. Now let's talk about the legislative status. The Senate passed a standalone No Tax on Tips Act with unanimous consent on May 20, 2025. The House included a similar provision in the broader One Big Beautiful Bill, which passed on May 22, 2025. Differences between the two versions, such as the duration of the tax break and specific eligibility requirements, will need to be reconciled before final enactment. Impact. Supporters argue that the provision could increase take-home pay for millions of service industry workers, potentially boosting consumer spending. Critics contend that the policy may primarily benefit higher income tipped workers and could exacerbate income inequality. Labor concerns. Some labor advocates worry that employers might reduce base wages, relying more heavily on tips to compensate workers. There is concern that the provision could entrench the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, currently $2.13 per hour at the federal level. Now let's talk about administrative changes. Ensuring accurate reporting of tip income may be challenging, and there is potential for increased underreporting. So in summary, there are a lot of things that don't make this no tax on tips. You still have to pay payroll taxes. There's a $25,000 cap. People who earn more than $160,000 a year are exempt. Only time will tell if this bill has any real impact should it pass in this form. Let's do a quick rundown of Republican senators who are not happy with this bill. Starting with Senator Ron Johnson. He opposes the bill's projected $3.1 trillion addition to the national deficit over the next decade and the inclusion of a $4 trillion debt ceiling increase. He advocates for deeper spending reductions to align with conservative fiscal principles.
I'm sorry, the House bill would probably add, I've calculated $4 trillion. You're saying you have these independent analysts saying it's 3.3 to 4 trillion. I agree with that. We have to reduce the deficit, and so we need to focus on spending.
The second one that I have here is Senator Rand Paul. He criticizes the bill for its significant increase to the federal deficit and the $4 trillion debt ceiling hike. He emphasizes the need for substantial spending cuts to accompany any tax reform.
I support spending cuts. I think the cuts currently in the bill are wimpy and anemic, but I still would support the bill, even with wimpy and anemic cuts, if they weren't going to explode the debt. The problem is the math doesn't add up.
Senator Josh Hawley. He warns that the proposed Medicaid cuts could alienate working-class voters who rely on such programs. He stresses the importance of protecting these constituents from adverse effects.
Over 1 million Missourians get Medicaid benefits, including hundreds of thousands of children. These are people who are working. These are people who are in need. We should not come in and take away their health care.
Senator Susan Collins. She expresses opposition to deep cuts to Medicaid, which she believes could harm vulnerable populations, including disabled children and seniors. She also raises concerns about the impact of rural healthcare services.
I do not want to see a tax increase go into effect for our small businesses, for example, and for middle and lower income families. I want to see the doubling of the child tax credit remain and not revert to where it was. So there's a lot good in the bill. I am looking very carefully at the Medicaid provisions in particular.
Senator Lisa Murkowski. She voices apprehension over Medicaid cuts that could be devastating to Alaska, particularly affecting rural hospitals and healthcare access. She also opposes the repeal of clean energy tax credits, which are vital for Alaska's energy sector. Senator Lindsey Graham, of all people. He advocates for a two-pronged legislative approach, separating tax reforms from other provisions like border security and defense. He believes combining all measures into a single bill could jeopardize national security priorities.
There's some of these cuts are not real, and we're talking about over a decade. You know, if you do $1.5 trillion, that's like 1.5%. So let's don't get high on our horse here that we've somehow made some major advancement of reducing spending costs.
So what does this tell us? These senators' objections underscore the internal divisions within the Republican Party regarding the big, beautiful bill. Maybe it's not so beautiful after all. Their concerns have ranged from fiscal responsibility and healthcare impacts to strategic legislative approaches. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.